Guess let's do a sound check. 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9. Am I good? Okay, good. Anyway, I'm a venture capitalist, so it's going to be a little different approach. We only have a capacity for 12 slides. That's all we can process, is all we can make up. So we'll go kind of quickly here. 12 slides in 29 minutes, hopefully, and then hopefully we'll have some time for open discussion, too. And I'll be joined by one of my colleagues, Chris Randall's here in just a second, who I'll mention. I guess, first of all, the background here is Brad invited me to come talk about this. He called me up earlier in the year and said, hey, you're continuing to make these investments in this industry. What are you seeing? Why are you doing this? What are your thoughts going forward? So, and we talked about this, and I told Brad I was really inspired by some things around globalization that I think really impact the investment thesis we've been developing and, in fact, investing in over the last few years. So I thought I would come and share that today. I want to make sure I do that with the utmost respect, so I'm going to throw out some ideas about how the industry might change. I think it'll hopefully spur some conversation, but in the spirit of COFES, I'd like to do that. I'll also try to reflect a little bit on both mechanical and AEC. The final thing I'll say about this quick presentation is globalization is an enormous topic. I think we all know that. We can't escape it on a daily basis. This week's Economist, you just can't escape it. I just opened up the paper this morning, an article on Romania pricing labor going up, an article on a shortage of skilled workers in India, and it really continues to develop in really many different angles. So I worked on this presentation with Chris Randalls and Mark Sawyer, and one of the things we talked about is that to really do justice, this is such a broad topic, it is so deep, that we really needed to seize on just one thread, and we've done that. And I'll share with what that is, and we'll follow that thread through and see how it impacts perhaps the future of this industry. Now, Bruce, I was a little nervous when you started your presentation yesterday and you started talking about Google SketchUp Earth, Google Earth SketchUp as a potential spine, because that is my first slide here. And I share this slide really from a point of reference. So we led the investment syndicate that allowed this company to scale, the company called SketchUp that is now part of Google. I used this slide to start for really a couple of reasons. One is that it was really a first up-close, highly impactful glimpse at globalization. And the second one is that we decided to try some things in this company that I think could mean something for the future of engineering software companies and the relationships with customers going forward, too. So the quick story I'll tell here is that two things. One is that when we were invested in the company, this was a product that was downloaded for free, and you could use it for a substantial period of time before you paid for it. In fact, the pricing philosophy was, let's put it out there, let's let anyone in the world download it, use it for free, do whatever they want. If they like it, send us $300 or $400. That was kind of the strategy, and it was a little different than how it was actually implemented, but that was the belief behind it. When I was there as an investor, and I used to go there for board meetings, I would sit in a room and I would watch the monitor for the downloads as people were downloading from all over the world. And I have to say, it was almost like a heart-beating experience the first time I did it, right? From Beijing to Boston to Brussels to Bangalore, and the downloads just kept coming. And you could just watch, and you could imagine that hundreds of thousands of people every day were downloading this product for free and doing things with it. It was really impactful. So that was one reason I shared it. Is a really different approach. So recently I asked the Google folks. Now today, by the way, they're not called SketchUp people. They're originally the SketchUppers, and of course they get bought by Google. And the naming convention there is they sort of not just merge the companies, they merge the cultures a little bit. And so today the SketchUp people, now part of Google, are called Scooglers. So I reached out to the Scooglers, and I said, can you tell me what the download cycle is like? Because they know I used to be fascinated watching it all the time. I said, I need to know the number. And they said, well, we can't tell you the number, of course. That's proprietary information. And I said, well, give me something I could share with these folks about what this means. And they said, well, we can tell you that when you were here, you know what our growth rate was like, and you know what our monthly downloads were like. We now exceed that on a significant basis on a daily. We now exceed that monthly rate that was when you were involved here on a daily basis. That puts it in perspective. So I don't know what the number actually is. I asked this question, they wouldn't answer. But I think that the impact of what happened 1 year ago on March 14th has yet to be felt in the industry when you get these numbers of people who are beginning to apply a product like this. So anyway, quickly, here's our premise, the single thread identified. One is it's really about the empowerment of the individual. And you can take that in many different ways. And by the way, you can see this person, does he appear to be just a little bit tense? I think it's because he wants access to the model and he's got a viewer markup tool. That was a joke. Actually, we're going to develop that thought a little bit more. So hang with me on that. But here's the idea. This is the basis for a lot of the technology, the discussion on technology, empowered by technology. Globalization is increasing at an ever faster rate. We heard Brad say that. We'll talk about an author who believes that right now, but the impact of it follows all the way through to the very business that we do together. So we'll talk about how this impacts going forward. So I spent time with Mark Sayer, who many of you know who could not be here, and Chris Randall is here with me today. We just finished an investment in a company called Vico Software. That's the company that Mark's now the CEO of. That was the spin out of Graphisoft's construction division that we financed recently. We closed it on March 30th, and we had the first board meeting on April 1st, the Sunday. Now, that's a bad idea, by the way. And actually, Mark said to me during the first break of the board meeting, he said, by the way, I got to notice I have jury duty tomorrow. I said, Mark, that's an April Fool's joke. He goes, no, it's not really. So I said, I'll spring for a wizard suit. Why don't you show up in that? We need you to kind of keep focused on the company. But Mark's too straight-laced. He wanted to go back and do that. So Mark was hopefully going to be here with us. He's just finished jury duty yesterday. So apparently we convicted somebody. Anyway, so Chris Randall is with me here, too. Mark was CEO of SketchUp when it was acquired by Google, long history in the industry. And Chris was the CEO of MathSoft. And so Chris and Mark and I have spent a better part of the last year developing some theories around the future of engineering software industry and companies that we can invest in and build going forward. And at Borealis, we've made 5 investments: SketchUp, Nuforma, SpaceClaim, and Vista, which is an infrastructure company, and Vico. So we've got 5 bets in the last 30 months into this industry. So quickly back to globalization. So this simple thread was really important. I talked to Brad. I read this book, Lexus and the Olive Tree, when I left Autodesk and took a couple years off. Lost my mind and became a venture capitalist. I read this book, Lexus and the Olive Tree, by Tom Friedman, and then he wrote this book, The World is Flat. Who's read the book? Who's read the entire book? Okay, that's impressive if you really did. If you've read that book, the theme is really clear, but he keeps developing it page after page, chapter after chapter. In fact, if you read the Economist review of it, kindly offered to me by Chris Randalls, they question some of the validity of the historical comparison, because I don't know that it necessarily qualifies as a brief history of the 21st century. But he makes a couple of really important points here that mean a lot to our industry, I'm convinced. Because technology is such a driver and enabler in the process of globalization, he tries to put it in that metaphor, and so he sort of reflects back quickly on Release 1.0, Release 2.0, and Release 3.0. And Release 1.0, of course, starts in his view with Columbus. Some people might say it started differently, but it's when countries started to enter a global era where they started to trade and so forth. And after that, in the Industrial Revolution, 20th, 21st century, we started to have companies become multinationals and begin to service customers all over the world. And then finally, he says about the year 2000, we entered Release 3.0, which is individual empowerment. And we'll talk about some of the forces he thinks create that. But the bottom line is this is broad. I mean, this is bigger than anything to do with our software industry. This is a world phenomena that he makes the point of. So he uses these things called the 10 flatteners in his book, The World is Flat. I'm not going to go through these in detail. You might view some of these as more milestones. But basically, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening of democracy. Netscape IPO is interesting. You might think that's a milestone. He says that's the beginning of the browser-based world in which we live today. Workflow software, that's VPNs. Open sourcing, we know what that's about, communities aligning to share through Linux and so forth. Outsourcing the ability to have business done in India for U.S. companies at a lower rate, and in fact, he thinks it saved the Indian economy. Offshoring the migration of manufacturing to China, elevating it to economic prominence. Supply chain, the Walmart famous supply chain. We all know about supply chains here. So insourcing the ability of UPS and FedEx to perform logistics for mom and pop shops. Anybody who wants to start a business can go out and do it. You get them to perform your business, and to the customer who buys something from you in a different part of the world, it seems like you're a really big company. Informing is the power of Google search. We can all do our searches. And then wireless, of course, is when this becomes really personal and really mobile. That's the idea behind all this. I want to make a comment on the informing part, the power of Google search, by the way. Brad and I are having this conversation about the title of this presentation. And he says to me, we agree on what it is. Is the engineering world really flat? So after a couple days, I'm traveling somewhere, and I go to Google, which is where we all start our presentation research, right? And I type in, is the engineering world really flat? What comes up is me giving this presentation. Thank you, Brad. So hopefully you'll feel that some of this is in the original thought category, okay? When that happened, I realized we had some work to do. And in fact, I really started to spend some time with Chris on this. And actually, Chris was inspired many years ago. And this sort of puts globalization in some historical perspective. This is the first sentence out of Ted Levitt's article in the Harvard Business Review in 1983. So he saw way back then that technology was going to be an amazing factor, right? He couldn't have perceived Netscape and so forth, and maybe not even the Internet. Clearly he didn't. But he saw that that was what was going to perhaps transform our world. And that's actually first credited with coining the term globalization. So enough globalization for now. Let's begin to move a little bit more towards the main thrust of this. But before we go there, I think there are some other trends that are intermingled here. Some of them are cause, some of them are effects, some of them are related. But let's look at three chunks of them. One is, in our world today, almost anything we do, competition is increased. I think people would agree with that. You know, the benefit of that as consumers or people in businesses, we have increasing choice. Some people may say this industry may not have as much choice. I think that's going to change in the future. Standards enable things like these laptops to be built and actually work together. They continue to increase, and there's been not just pricing pressure as a result of these developing phenomena, there's also pricing transparency. In this industry 20 years ago, when we would make a software product and we price it, we could price anything we want in different countries. You can't do that today. So an interesting phenomenon. A second group that feeds all this is, in fact, the new generation of workers. In fact, I don't know that they're properly called Gen Y. They might be called Gen Z because they are comfortable with the third axis. They don't know anything but the third axis. Our kids that are growing up today, though, engineers of the future. The phenomena of more PCs and TVs happened a few years ago here in the United States anyway. And third screen is a reference to the third screen. TV, PC, and now mobile device is an example. Internet, a lot of people in different areas of the world really increasingly view this as utility. And then you have individual trends that come out of things like that, like software increasingly being delivered as a service. So there's a lot of accompanying trends that contribute to the acceleration and effect of globalization. Who knows what this is? Wikipedia, snapped right off the top. Type in BRIC, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China. Type in BRIC. So, you know, if people haven't been as familiar with that, the idea is that the combined GDP of those countries today is probably less than 10% of global GDP. The prediction by the middle of the century is it might reach as high as 40 or 50% of global GDP. So that's a big part of the transition. This brick analogy, I will tell you that a year ago, the last time I sat down and I got to enjoy the downloads on SketchUp, I can just tell you it was impactful to watch the number of people in these countries downloading that particular product. So another phenomena out there. So let's transition, though, to one of the areas what it really means. I think one of the things that happens with this area of individual empowerment, if you buy into this globalization theme, do people buy in general, by the way? You kind of have to say yes. Okay, anyway, the idea, though, is that it wreaks havoc on our work processes. It really does. And we're going to look at it in two different ways, both from a data and from a product model standpoint, just really quickly. So, again, we're staying at a high level. But just think about it. I mean, we really wanted, you know, the goal previously has been we've got to control the process under which we build buildings, under which we build products. We've got to manage the data. Everybody has to have their roles and responsibilities. I'm not sure that works today. Right? This individual empowerment, people download these products, people use these products. The confusion between home workers and prosumers and consumers and professionals is all intermingled. And data is flowing everywhere. And I think the process is really at risk. I think that's both a challenge and an opportunity. Quickly look at this. One of our investments is a company called Newforma. Really quick, simple diagram they use to show the different various pieces of the AEC building project process. But you have all these individual, really great products that do a lot of task automation, creating a lot of their own data. And there's an opportunity for someone to just go in as they're doing, as others might, and just get that data in a really simple, light fashion, enable people to use it and get it when they want it and find it. You know, it's not about controlling things, it's about index and search, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Let's look a little bit more at the mechanical process. Let's think about the actual physical product. You know, we're going to make this mouse, we're going to make this guy. What's increasingly happening? People that are involved in that process, they went in on the action. So one of the effects of this self-empowerment, if you buy into that philosophy, is that no matter who you are, you want to be more involved in the action. And if you believe that, one of the things that you have to also believe is that today as vendors, we serve up a lot of solutions to these people to deal with them. And it's a substandard offer, I think, in a lot of cases. We kind of hear people rumbling back with that, and people try to find ways around that. So I think, again, this is transformation. But, you know, the other thing about it is it breaks the workflow continuity. So let me show you what one of our companies we invested in is doing. This is quickly a diagram by our friends at Space Claim, a quick, simple look at the mechanical design process. And here's an example of where they believe people should have access to the 3D model. Not just in the CAD area, not just in one area, not just viewers and markups, wherever. Let's get these people in the process. And, in fact, you can't stop these people as part of the point that I'm trying to make. And you can decide where everything's at in that continuum. And it's different by company and by country and so forth, but there's a major impact happening there. So let me put in perspective some ways to sort of think about this. If you buy into the fact this is an evolution, there really is change embarking. And evolution gives us a lot of freedom in the spectrum of time here, so I don't think it's a revolution. It's happening. I don't know when these impacts fully develop. But let me put it to you this way. We'll think about it this way. In the past, we used to think about top-down. How do we think now? We think bottom up. This may be a good word association game. Heavy. What do we think is next? Light. Dr. Orr. All right. Proprietary? Absolutely. This might get tougher in the next click, by the way. This is about users. They're dedicated. Now they're casual's tough because that may imply drug use. Periodic is another way to think about these users because, by the way, they don't see themselves as casual. You know, I'm doing analysis on this particular product in the mechanical design process. I'm not casual about anything. I just can't take time to learn that 3D CAD system. But I want to do something with that model. Check out, check in. Index search. It's about that unstructured data. It's everywhere. Whether people admit it or not, it's everywhere. The ability to go out and find that data. Task automation. Process enablement. That would be the star of the day. Free copy of SketchUp. Software. Everyone says hardware. Service. Software increasingly delivered as a service. Final one, corporate decision. In the theme of today, individual decision. So just ways to think about it. Maybe a slide to help you think about your own interpretation of that and what it means to you. So one of the things that we'll move into a little bit more concrete as to where the industry might develop is next generation solutions. Now, by the way, I call these solutions versus software products for a reason. I'll talk about more in just a second. But our philosophy and the investment thesis that we're developing and that we've put about $20 million in 5 companies behind, and we're going to increase that over the next few years, is about web-delivered solutions. Very personalized, not just to me as a person, but to what I might be doing at a certain point in time. I'm a landscape architect. Today I'm doing that parking lot. I don't want to fire up a software package. I just want to do that parking lot. I'm doing that today. That's what I should be able to do. Content and data enabled. Why do people have to go out separately and find things? It should just be available to them, particularly if they've done it before. It should be right there. Simple, I guess maybe a better description is easy. That was one of the breakthroughs for SketchUp, by the way. It's just easy to use with an idea. Open, people want their data increasingly. They want it to be shared with others. Data to be shared and then broadly used. These products are broadly used across a wide variety. And then the business models are changing. When software is delivered as a service, it's priced on a subscription model basis. There's no upfront fee. In fact, increasingly it's going to be pay-as-you-go. It's going to be a metered basis. In the consumer segment, I can tell you I'm already looking at investment plans for products that will come out in 2 or 3 years. They'll be based on advertising models in the consumer design software segment. So let's talk about what these next generation solutions companies might look like. We dropped the name software here for a reason. I'm not sure software is really a natural act in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's sort of created as this extra layer to help people do particular things. But in a lot of ways, if you believe where we're going with this, and you believe technology can continue to advance the way it has, it's kind of in the way. It's an extra layer. So I don't know what else to call them right now. So I call them solutions companies quickly. Those companies need to have flexible business models going forward, as we've talked about already. Need to have a culture of really direct connection to the customer and not making a product and jamming it at people. It's co-creating it with the customers. We're trying to drive that through all of our companies as an example. And that also means a relationship with every customer. In this day and age, every customer deserves, demands, and should have a direct relationship with the people that make the products that they use. That's the concept behind that. Truly collaborative. This is all about collaboration. This is all about a society and a world that's becoming totally collaborative. And the companies that serve this industry need to be truly collaborative, not just with their customers, but with other players in the industry, increasingly. And then finally, they need to be global like anything else. And in fact, if you buy into this concept that we're in a smaller, faster, wired world, and Friedman's idea that the world is flat, it's level, it's a web-enabled even playing field, as he would say in his book, then it's interesting how the transition of where software might come from may even change. It's not just people can use software products all over the world from someone that makes it here. Where do you think the next generation of software is going to be actually developed? Or the next generation of solutions of those companies are going to be? They can also be anywhere. So it really provides some interesting dynamics, and the companies are going to have to do that. This Vico software we just invested in has 45 employees in 8 countries and 40 to 45 contractors in another group of countries, and 8 employees in the U.S. in 7 different states. So that is perhaps a little too virtual, a little too global, but I think it's going to work. Anyway, that's a quick view of this. I want to invite Chris Randalls up really quickly with me to answer questions. Specifically, Chris is designed to answer questions from Bruce. But will help me on any other questions, and then we just have a sort of a closing thought here. Hopefully that wasn't too quick for everybody, but I think we wanted to leave time for some conversation. Questions? Points? Disagreements in the back? Peter? Yeah, I think so. Peter's point is that while this globalization is accelerating, is very real, there's a counter trend which is pushing back a bit and saying, hey, we need to stop this now. We need to protect ourselves. We need to handle this and manage this in a more effective fashion. Chris, I'll give you the first shot at that.
Thank you, Jesse.
I just repeated the question. Did I do a good job? Thank you.
Well, let me see if I can give a quick answer to that. Well, clearly, I mean, you're either a free trader or you're not. And most of the experts in this area, even those who see, big revolutions coming, like Professor Blinder at Princeton, are advocates of free trade because, I mean, we've seen the greatest global economic growth in the last 15 years as a result of a real move towards democracy and free trade. The argument for it, I think, on both sides is that if you enable free trade, then you create a larger market and that both sides profit because living standards rise up in the low-cost countries and market scale increases for vendors in other countries. But I think, my comment on this would be more about how you'd organize, because the politics is not about what engineering software companies do, but how would you organize to take advantage? And I think Jesse touched on some of these points that the really global organizations have become decentered. My bugbear about companies working globally is that they're really multinational still, dealing with a global economy. I mean, how many of you who are users or even vendors have experienced the intense geographical competition between different arms of the same company? And I think it's up to us to create much more fluid organizations. And in doing that, you'll mitigate the risk of the backlash either way, in the low-cost country or the high-cost home country.
In fact, that's a good answer. You can see why we brought Chris with us. But I think actually in Friedman's book, interestingly enough, he does cite in his latest release of the book, I'm not sure what release that is, he stuck another 100 pages in there, but he does talk about the effect of the impact of this actually enables sort of bad people to do things too. So there's an additional complexity here regarding some of the dynamics of the world we live in today too. So I think there's an inevitability here, and the question is whether or not people, whether you're a town, whether you're an individual or a company or a user, whatever it is, the idea is that this is a rolling thing, and embracing is the best strategy and figuring out how to manage it for your benefit. And I'll go back to the workflow process diagrams. I just tried to illustrate at a very high level. People can argue about whether or not that process should be that way, but the reality of it is people are doing all kinds of things, and it's about channeling that data and access to things versus just sort of open warfare. So it's really going to be an interesting dynamic, both for the world and for our industry, too. Bruce, Chris will be answering that question. I'm just kidding, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. That was going to be a long way to see. Can you tell me more about space claims?
Well, I have to be careful because I don't want to be up here just pitching for our companies, but obviously you asked the question. And that really is, and obviously they're here, Mike Payne and Danny Dean are here somewhere. Thank you. The question is, can you tell me more about space claim that plans to put people in touch with 3D models? And the idea is that they've created a new approach to this, which is not about a CAD system. It's about creating a 3D environment that enables many more people to effectively interact with the model versus breaking the workflow. So you can check it out at spaceclaim.com, I guess. Probably all I can say on that. Next question, Dave. I'll come back over there. I'm going to get better at this. The question would be, we have $3 billion companies who've done very well in our industry, and how do you foresee as a venture capitalist companies that are being based upon free use of software and open source to become billion-dollar companies in the future? And that answer is not clear. I mean, we're investing in the future. We're going to have to sort some things out, but it may be that the business models don't reflect traditional licensing approaches, and it may not be $1 billion. It may be different business models. It may not be this, pay up front and revenues may not be that way. They may be a slower ramp over a longer period of time. One of the dynamics that we face in funding a new generation of software as a service companies is that rather than getting license fees up front, we just have subscription pricing. And so the first 2 years of revenue for those companies in the market is kind of interesting. We have to provide extra financing because they can't be financed by upfront license fees anymore, which I think is going to drive better relationships with customers. enhance the power of the customer in the relationship because you have to continue to earn that money versus getting your money up front and then worrying about them later. So I don't know, I don't have a crisp answer to the question about how to make a billion-dollar company. I actually do. It's a little bit secret in our investment thesis. But, you know, it's going to be a really interesting changing landscape. And it might be that in advertising space, you know, advertising is part of the business model going forward in consumer space. I do think one thing I'll say, and I want Chris to take a shot at this too, is that in Jay's session yesterday, we talked about the existing vendors in the space. And, you know, if you believe what this is saying, it's no surprise that Adobe and Autodesk have done extraordinarily well. Because really they're companies that kind of came from bottom up. I mean that in a complementary way, in empowering a lot of individuals versus a top-down strategy. So I think there's another reinforcement of this kind of being. And so I think that's going to be a part of that. But the business models are going to change. Chris?
I think you've pretty much covered it. I would make two comments. If I said to you 10 years ago, imagine a company coming to market to challenge Microsoft's dominance in operating systems and essentially doing it based on free software, you'd laugh. But Red Hat exists today and is proof that service built on the open source model can generate significant added value. So I'm not saying open source at all will be the model for the next killer engineering company, but I mean, it's conceivable that could be the case and that service becomes the differentiator or content becomes more valuable than just tool if interoperability becomes a reality. I think the other comment I would make is I mean, as someone who's looked at options of building a software company myself as an operating person, if you were starting from scratch today, you can get a lot further, a lot quicker because of the kind of tools that are out there, whether they're free or low cost or just through using standards much more widely. So I think that, I mean, what I strongly believe in is that the industry will see a big revolution from proprietary to open. And I think, I mean, just sitting in the Mechanical Engineering Forum yesterday was pretty clear to me that a lot of the issues that customers face stem from a historically very proprietary approach to developing engineering, well, to engineering software as a whole.
Yeah, the future clearly is evolving in the hands of those who have scale. And that ability, you know, so, you know, you don't have to have the proprietary pricing. You look at Adobe and Autodesk, and that's about scale in a lot of ways. By the way, SketchUp was built on millions of dollars less than you can count on one hand. Sold for many, many, many more times that. But very capital efficient in a very low pricing model and a ton of free users. So maybe a harbinger of things to come. I think there was one back in the back that I missed in the back first, and I'll come back, yes. Okay, so regarding globalization, one of the risks is IP as data goes more out in the marketplace. Is that correct? And there's a risk around that. I actually think that that's an area of opportunity, right? Because you have the exact right concern, and I don't know that there's enough software products as we know them today that actually capture that. That may be, that actually is a basis for some ideas we're developing around a new generation of solutions. Chris, you want to take a?
Well, I mean, I used to run MathSoft, which PTC acquired last year, and I would argue PTC probably have the best product in MathCAD for capturing and retaining and reusing intellectual property, because really what you can do with a product like that is what we used to call kind of source code management for engineering design, I think, and it was a credit to them for seeing the fit and the power of that. But I think that there are lots of approaches, and I was talking to Jesse actually about a very interesting podcast which you can listen to from Dan Bricklin's website. Dan was the inventor of the spreadsheet, the guy I used to know quite well when I worked in the spreadsheet world. And he was just interviewing a guy at Motorola who's got 69,000 employees and 76,000 users, including Motorola and outside, using things like wikis and blogs and facts and forums to share best practices, capture information. They cite 38 terabytes of data that they've collected through just a very sort of democratic, easy, low-cost process. So I think there are lots of options, but it was very much highlighted in Aviation Week earlier this year, looked at retention and the issues of shortages of employees and the retiring of the baby boomer generation of engineers, and cited a survey figure, I think from Accenture, that only 19% of engineering manufacturers, this is in the manufacturing sector, have any strategy, organized strategy for capturing expertise. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I don't think there's a big risk, though, as it moves out. I mean, you know, there are some bandit countries today, and this copying goes on, but that's always happened, and I don't think it's necessarily accelerated by the kind of tools that we're talking about today.
So the question is, in this move towards globalization, the culture of creation is different by different countries in different areas of the world, and how do you, how will that play out really going forward? How do you encourage the creation, the culture of creation to develop in some of the developing areas of the world as you move towards globalization?
Well, I have an opinion on that, but I don't know if I have the right answer. I mean, the same was said of the Japanese 20, 30 years ago. And what changed their approach from copy to arguably, high-class innovation today in a lot of industries was, the will of the strategic will of their governments, but also the pull of consumers. Better, more reliability, standardization, the stuff that Ted Levitt forecasted in the early 80s. I'm very much a sort of optimist and free trader by by nature, and I'm an immigrant as well. So, I think it's interesting to me that. So I would encourage sort of free flow of people, and I think that's actually how you engender that. And it was interesting to me looking at the figures, because several years ago there used to be about 250,000 immigrant visas, H-1 visas that were issued for engineering, and that's been cut down to, I think, 69,000. More than half of the applications for this year were made by outsourcing firms, Infosys, Wipro, and others. And that's because they badly want to put people into the U.S. to improve their skill set with a view to being innovators in the future rather than just subcontractors. I think that's actually a good flow because that's how you make friends and that's how you create trade. That would be my 2 cents.
Questions? Any more questions? We're good. One in the back, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay? This is the question of actually the countries of India and China rapidly growing, have an increasing demand for physical availability to facilitate the product process. Yeah. Chris, you want to take a final shot at that, and then we'll wrap it up?
I'm not sure that there is an answer. The engineering software world could take a shot at that, but I think it's solving that. But one positive byproduct is that the amount of costs associated with just human capital will decline, which actually favors incumbent, say, domestic or West European producers today. But I think there are a lot of opportunities to innovate. I mean, clearly there's a crunch on resources from oil to raw materials. And I think one thing that we as an industry can do is really help people. I mean, for example, the great strides made in composites and analysis of composites, I think indicates how much opportunity there is to move to different and more innovative materials. So material science can really help in that respect. But I think it's actually good from the point of view of the disparity in just labor cost. And those multiples that Brad was showing in terms of low-cost countries, economists say 20% of a U.S. wage, and mid-cost of 40%. Well, they're going to rise up, so those things are going to level over time.
All right, I'll just close with a final thought, and that is, this speed and breadth of globalization is only accelerating. If you believe Thomas Friedman's basis, or you're based on your own experiences, the rise of the individual is going to wreak havoc in our work processes. And I think the end of it means actually a lot of opportunities. It's not dire. It's actually in the opportunity category if you can figure this thing out. Products, business models, relationships are going to continue to evolve and change, and I think that's a lot of opportunity for this industry, and the challenge will be, can the existing vendors adapt and be flexible and quick enough, given their existing hoisted business models and large customers they have to serve? Or will it be to a new generation of companies that can more easily accelerate into that? Or will, in fact, those intersect? Will innovation, thrive in the small companies and then become part of the larger companies, which is what's traditionally happened along the way? It isn't necessarily the worst thing either. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully this was helpful.